Welcome to Missionary Talks by Marcy Fenn. This is the Transition Video Part 2, Transition Part 2. It's important that you watch the Transition Introduction and the Transition Part 1 before starting this video. So we're going to pick up where we left off from Part 1, and that is on transitions, or these times of change. And so if you'll take the handout called the Transition Experience, there is a series of, or a cycle of feelings that happens in each one of these stages. So even if you want to write above each one, starting at involvement, leaving, transition, entering, and re-involvement, we'll go through the cycle of transition feelings. For example, in the involvement stage, there's this feeling of settled, being settled. Then in leaving, it's unsettling. In transition, there's the feeling of chaos. In entering, there's the feeling of resettling. And in re-involvement, there's the feeling of settled. So basically, you have this cycle of feelings from feeling settled, unsettling, chaos, resettling, and then being settled again. So what you'll notice on this chart is that on the side, we have three different categories of how we're going to be looking at the transition experience. The first one is your social status. By social status, we mean how the transition affects your position in society, social hierarchy, or rank. So the social status is how this transition affects your position in society, social hierarchy, or rank. In social posture, what we're looking at as how does this transition affect your attitude, manner, and disposition? So the social posture, or how you posture or position yourself, is talking about how the transition affects your attitude, manner, and disposition. For the psychological experience, this is how does the transition affect or relate to my mental and emotional state? So how is this transition affecting and relating to my mental and emotional state? So as we go through each of the areas, we will be comparing it to those three different items: the social status, social posture, and the psychological experience of what's happening. So phase one is called involvement. So we're looking at phase one in that column. And what this is that you have a sense of belonging. So your social status, your position in society, you have a status, right? So your sense of time is present or in the now. You live in a present structure and you belong. You have a reputation. You have position. You know where you fit. And you know what the expectations are, and you have a good network of information. So this sense of belonging is, I'm part of an in-group, I have a reputation, a position, this sense of knowing things are familiar to me, expectations are familiar to me. When we move into your social posture of how is this affecting your attitude and your manner and your disposition, it's a comfortable time for you. Comfortable time, you're committed. What does that mean? You have responsibilities. You're responsible in your attitude and your disposition. This is the time that people are looking to hire you or add you on staff or volunteer or go overseas or all of that. And so at this time, of course, you look very responsible and responsive, and that's probably part of the reason why you get the job, is because you have this sense of belonging and you have this committed attitude. You have your previous experience of what you're committed to based on the fact that you know what is expected of you and you have information at your hands. The third category is the psychological experience. So how is this affecting your mental and emotional state? Well, there's a sense of intimacy. So you know what is going on. You know how to find things. You are known and you know other people. You know what to ask and who to ask, what to ask, who has the answers. And this leaves you in an emotional state of feeling secure and confirmed. So you're very present oriented in this stage. You know what is going on. Phase 2. So phase 2 in the transition experience is the leaving. And so usually about 6 months before a major transition, things will begin to be unglued or start coming apart or undone. And so our sense of time becomes temporary. In roles and responsibilities, we begin to disengage. You start to relinquish your roles, turn over responsibilities to somebody else, someone that's taking your job or position or place, or is going to run things. We stop doing the things that we needed to do before. We no longer care as much like we used to. So a good example of this is the senior high class. I mean, seniors in high school often do not do as well academically as they did earlier. They tend to be a little less responsible. And someone who has always been like faithful and practicing a musical instrument or doing their work suddenly stops because they're dealing with this. They know that a transition or change is coming up, and so they're starting to pull away. They're starting to disengage from that activity. In relationships, things can get difficult. So in your friendships, people start to loosen ties and to detach. Friends and family members begin to notice a change, and we don't call as often, they don't call as often, or we don't ask the same kind of questions you would ask if you knew somebody was going to be sticking around for a long time. We don't care as much as we once did. Perhaps the other person is not ready for you to back off like that. So some conflicts might start to occur. People may say some things that they regret. And the more intense the relationship you have with somebody, the more intense the conflict can be, or the more hurt feelings can get. So things can get pretty hostile during that time. So your roles, your responsibilities, your relationships are starting to change as you're going through this leaving time. So what is your social status during this time? Well, it's a time of celebration. So what's happening is there's goodbyes, there's parties, you're getting all the attention, the recognition, the farewells, uh, all of these things, you're able to have these closures. But what is happening with your social posture? So some loosen ties and disengage from people. Some people are uncomfortable with the process of saying goodbye. So in one case, there was this family that just didn't want to say goodbye, and the way they handled that was to tell everybody that they were leaving on a certain date, like on the 17th, but they were actually flying out on the 15th. So they were so uncomfortable with goodbyes that they just avoided it altogether. What is happening to you with the psychological experience, with your mental and your emotional state? Well, this is a time of denial of feelings. Denial of feelings. So it's very common for a person in this stage of leaving to feel rejected by others, but the feelings of rejection are often denied. So back to the example of seniors leaving high school, they often start to feel rejected by the teachers, parents, and friends. But they're going to deny those parents. So it dawns on them that with the people they will be saying goodbye to are getting used to the idea of them already being gone. So, the teacher is maybe planning on their class for next year, or preparing them and talking constantly about how they're going to go on to college and how what they're doing in the classroom is going to affect them in college. Their parent or mom at home might be turning their bedroom into a guest room. Maybe the other sibling is like, yay, I'm finally going to get their room, and I'm going to have my own room, and other people in the family, and you're already starting, people around you and you are already starting to transition out, and they might already be talking about some of those things. And at school, people are making plans for the next year, and of course they're not going to invite you because you're not going to be there. So it's logical. You're not going to be there the next year. But what happens is the denying of the feelings. Feelings are still there that you're not going to have a room at your parents' house, or your brother's going to take over, or nobody's inviting you to these events. So the person who's transitioning is going to find, or the high school senior is going to find ways to take shots at the person they feel that is rejecting them. Shots at the teacher, thoughts at the parent, shots at whoever, because that's what they're feeling in this. What happens a lot of times is that we deny the sadness. We talk about how glad we are to leave, not how sad we are. So we might deny the sadness, but it's still there, especially amongst missionaries. It's not so much that we're denying the sadness for ourselves. That's one thing. But then we go and deny the sadness for our kids. So if you move from country to country, or you're moving to do missionary work, volunteer work, or even a job, what we try to do is overcompensate for this sadness by saying how good it's going to be and how much fun we're going to have and focus on the adventure, but we're really at the same time denying the sadness. This is common among missionary children. Mom and dad say, it's great where we're going, but the truth is it hurts to say goodbye or to change or to move and miss people. So somehow we need to maintain a balance. Yes, there are good things ahead, but it does hurt to say goodbye, and so we have to recognize that it hurts to say goodbye. A missionary conducted a class for third culture kids, for high school students. These are kids that have traveled to multiple countries and gone from place to place, and they don't really know where home is. So what happened was she had one meeting and it turned into 5 meetings. So she asked them and she said, why were you so intense about these meetings? You felt so strongly you didn't even want to go home. And the embassy high school girl replied, we finally got to say how angry we are at being moved from country to country all over the world all our lives. So several of them were angry that they had not been allowed to express their sadness. When my parents told me we were going to move again, I really felt really bad. I didn't want to lose my friends again. I am sick at heart about it, but my mom says, don't worry, you're a friendly person. You'll make new friends right away. So she doesn't let me say how sad I feel. So this is bringing these transition talks to third culture kids, kids that have been moved around. It's not necessarily the fact that their parents have to move for work or missionary things. It's that they're being denied the right to say how they feel, that they're angry, that they're sad, that they're going to miss people. And so we have to let them do that. So we have to understand, why do we do that as parents then? Why do we do that to our children? Why do we push away these feelings of sadness or even deny them and try to focus on these good things? And it comes down to this. It is very uncomfortable for us as a parent to face the fact that the decisions we make can sometimes cause our children to suffer and grieve. So it's very uncomfortable for us to face the fact that the decision we make can cause our children to suffer and grieve. We don't want to face that we're the ones who have caused them this pain. Now, there's only one way to raise your kids, and that is in the will of God. So you can stay somewhere where it's comfortable and raise your kids out of the will of God, or you can move to another country or follow what God's calling you to do and raise them in the will of God. But raising them in the will of God, whether it's to stay or to go, doesn't mean that we deny the fact of they're going to need some help with transition. It doesn't mean that just because they feel sad or mad at us that we're doing the wrong thing, or how, that God's doing it to them. But if we allow them to express their feelings, that they're angry or they're sad or they're going to miss people, just acknowledge it. Yes, it's very hard. Sometimes it's very hard to do what God's calling us to do. And I'm sorry that you feel so sad, and I know that you're going to miss so-and-so. Let's find a way that you can stay in touch with them. Let's work that out and make extra effort to make sure that your kids are able to say their goodbyes and your kids are able to deal with their feelings as well. So when a missionary says, I'm going home, we're saying we're going to our home country. But the child may be going home at the end of furlough, but when their grandmother or grandparent asks, aren't you glad to be home? The child feels that they just left home, especially if they've grown up in the foreign country. So they know that by saying this isn't home, or by saying no, I don't miss it, they're going to hurt people's feelings. So then it causes even another sadness, and it might be denied as well, or they don't know how to express it. This is what I'm feeling. I'm being asked all these questions, but I'm not really from there, and I don't want to hurt people's feelings, and now that's making me feel even sadder. So just be careful and recognize it there. So If a missionary kid is having emotional problems, we can pretty safely guess that they are dealing with unresolved grief. Unresolved grief. So they're being pressured to deny their sadness. So if you go to another country and you're having all sorts of emotional problems with your kid, maybe go through the transition experience chart with them and have them express the feelings of being sad to leave their friends or doing whatever, or I'm angry at you for doing this to me, and be able to just listen and find ways, like I said, that they can communicate with their friends or stay in touch. So what happens is we deny this sense of rejection. We're starting to pull away from people and we're feeling rejected, but we start to deny that. And we deny our feelings of sadness. And another feeling we deny is the feeling of guilt. So we have this rejection happening, we have this sadness happening, and now we have guilt. So it's common at this stage to deny that the person has had or is having problems with anybody else. So you want to deny that you're having problems with people. And in the process of leaving, there may have been broken relationships, and we contribute those broken relationships to say, that's not really a problem. I'm not responsible here. I'm really not guilty, and trying to cover it up. So we need to admit and express our feelings. If we don't talk about it, then we won't allow ourselves to properly move through the stages of transition. If we don't talk about it, then we're not going to allow ourselves to move through transition. How we prepare for leaving has a profound impact on how we adjust to the new situation or the new place. In order to say hello well, we need to have done a good job of saying goodbye. So in order to say hello well to a new job, a new state, a new country, a new situation, we need to properly and have done a good job of saying goodbye. How we leave the home country, ministry, job, school, or church, even within the country if we're changing and shifting ministry, how we leave that affects how we enter the new country, ministry, job, school, and church. So we've looked at two phases on the transition experience, the involvement phase and the leaving phase. Now we're going to take a minute to go over how to leave well. How to leave well, or 3 ways that you can leave well. This is going to be important for you, your family, and for people coming to work with you, and I'll show you why as we go along. Number 1 in learning to leave well is to resolve unfinished business. To resolve unfinished business. So you can't deny guilt without generating real problems. And there will be problems if we do not deal with unresolved personal conflicts. So Sidney Bergman, who was a psychiatrist for the U.S. Peace Corps, he noticed many of the returning Peace Corps volunteers had difficulties readjusting to their home country. He began to wonder, why do all these people have this wonderful experience on another part of the globe and then fail to adjust when they come home? Some adjusted, others did not. Some cannot adjust to jobs. They wander around. They cannot focus. What is the difference? So we did some research to discover what made the difference. And for those who did not adjust, for the ones who did not adjust, they found one reason that just floated to the top, that kept coming back as he was doing all this research, and it was unresolved personal conflicts. Unresolved personal conflicts. So what would happen is a person would have a problem with a coworker or a national, and they would say, well, 6 months from now, I'm going to climb on that plane and I'm going to go back to my home country, and I'll be 5,000, 10,000 miles away from here, and I will never see these people again. So they have a conflict with somebody somewhere, but because their time is coming to an end, they decide, I'm going to be leaving soon anyways, why deal with it? It won't even matter. I'll be so far away from them, it won't matter. So what they would do is pack their bags and arrive in the home country with their visible suitcase in hand, but they would have a very heavy, invisible backpack of all the unresolved problems they were carrying along with them. So here they are, returning to the country. In the natural, And what people see, it looks like they only have their suitcase of what they brought home. But what people can't see is this heavy backpack of all these unresolved conflicts with people that they're carrying around. And they're heavy, and they're going to affect them. And from the report and from the study, affecting their transition back into their home country where the things are supposed to feel familiar. So please listen very carefully. This may be the most important thing that is said to you on the mission field. Jesus, who knows best, said, if you are offering a gift at the altar and there you remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift there on the altar. First go and reconcile to your brother and then come and offer your gift. If you want to look that up, it's Matthew 5:23 to 24. So here we are. We come to the foreign country, in our case Honduras, to love and give our life, gifts, talents, money, and time. Jesus would rather have you lay all of your service down, all of your sacrifice down for a minute, just to go and take care of those unresolved conflicts. Maybe the unresolved conflicts with a home church, some problems with you leaving, and then anything that happened with the home church or somebody in that home church. It could have been a conflict with a family member. It could have been a former ministry or job. So you need to go and deal with it. Then he would rather have you do that to take care of all those unresolved conflicts than to just continue serving, carrying this bag of garbage on our backs of past hurts, offenses, broken relationships, and just carry that around. This is very important with even people who are coming to serve with you. If you don't already, you should have some kind of packet that you have them fill out for their application and get some references. One of your questions should probably be, do you have any unresolved conflict or problems with other people? Because what you want to do is you want to get that resolved. Otherwise, they're going to be carrying that backpack into your ministry. And then when something else happens, they're going to think to themselves, well, I can deal with that because I'm leaving in a year or I'm leaving in a couple of years. And they will continue to not deal with conflict with you or the people around you. And then they'll go and leave and carry that to another place. So Jesus would rather have us stop all of our serving and our ministry and put everything on hold and go back and take care of unresolved conflict than he would for us to just go on. So we are going to fool ourselves when we think we can just bury it all, these hurts and these offenses, and carry on as normal. This is a key issue in the transition experience, to take care of the garbage and don't allow it to fester and cause problems in your relationship with that particular person and with everybody else. So it's possible that you wouldn't even have an issue in the next place you went, but because you're carrying around past hurts and offenses, that makes you susceptible to be more hurt and offended in the next place, and you keep piling these on top of each other. So the best way to leave well is to deal with all the resolved and unfinished business. The second way to leave well is to say goodbye to people, places, and things. To say goodbye to people, places, and things. So back to that senior high school student again. Let's assume that he had a teacher who really meant a lot to him. And he's leaving, and he can handle leaving high school in two different ways. He can just leave without saying goodbye, because maybe he's afraid or maybe he thinks it's going to be too emotional. So he says to himself, I'll probably never see Mr. Smith again. And it will feel to him like the lid of a coffin has just dropped shut. So what we try to do is encourage people or encourage your students or encourage your senior to do is, if a teacher meant a lot to you and had a teacher that was especially you appreciated a real lot, then you need to go and let them know. So say it to them face to face. That's part of the release. Because when you reaffirm a relationship, you're saying, this isn't the end of our relationship. We may not see each other for years. In fact, we may never see each other again, but the relationship is still intact. I let you know that I appreciate you. I let you know the sense of affection is warm and positive, and the relationship is affirmed. So there's a closure that is very freeing when we go and say goodbye to people. One little girl in Ecuador in about fourth grade in a little circle with other friends, uh, she was saying goodbye, and so all of her friends made this little circle and were saying goodbye because she had lived in Ecuador her whole life. All the girls were crying, and her mother was standing nearby, but her mother was not in a hurry. She really just stood there and let them say goodbye. She recognized the importance of what they were doing. UN and U.S. Embassy girls, refugees from Afghanistan. The Russians invaded Afghanistan, and the embassy people had to leave right away. So one UN girl, she had the opportunity to go and say goodbye. So she was in this talking with the other girls, and she was sharing how she was able to go back into the old school building, even though it had been bombed and it was all in shambles. The desks were turned over, but she was able to go in there and go to her locker, take some books out, went to her homeroom, sat at her desk, wrote something on the blackboard. And when another embassy girl heard that had been in the same school, heard about what she was able to do by going and back and saying goodbye, she just started crying. She just had all these tears. So suddenly she realized, the UN girl asked, "What's the matter?" And the other girl responded, "I never had a chance to say goodbye." So both had a painful experience in leaving, but there was a big difference between the girl who was able to go through the buildings, the places, and the things, and to be able to say goodbye. So that shows us to take the time before leaving our hometown or our house, say goodbye to the house, say goodbye to the neighborhood, say goodbye to the town, say goodbye to special places that you had in addition to the people and different things that you're going to miss. My kids have had a lot of goodbyes to say being at an international American school. A lot of times, even if a lot of kids come for 2 years and then they're gone, 2 years and they're gone. And it was one of the cons on our pros and cons list of them going to an international school is, yes, the pro was that you'd be able to make friends instead of, in contrast to being homeschooled. But the second thing was that these other kids might have to move on. Are you willing to deal with the con of making friends and then them leaving, making friends and then them leaving? So there was this one of my daughter's friends, they had like 4 going away parties. And I was like, all right, already, how many parties can you say goodbye? And she wanted to go to the airport and say goodbye to her at the airport. And I was kind of against it. We live like 30 to 40 minutes from the airport. I was kind of against it because I'm like, man, you've already had 4 going away parties. Do you really need to go to the airport and say goodbye? Thankfully, my husband was like, no problem, I'll drive her. And I'm glad that he did, because once I learned about the importance of saying goodbye and having that closure, even though she had already had 4 goodbye parties, everybody went to the airport to say goodbye, and it was one last final goodbye. So if they feel that they need that many goodbyes, they need that many goodbyes. But allowing people to say goodbye to people in that process to have closure. So during that second phase of leaving, it's important to start the process of saying goodbye early. Otherwise, you might not be able to get around to everybody. So you say goodbye to people, take time to go out for that last dinner or go to that goodbye party. Say goodbye to places. Some people need to say goodbye to the quiet time on the porch where they spent time with God. Some people need to say goodbye to the school building or their house, especially if they're going to sell it. Other people need to say goodbye to things. Maybe you're moving to another culture and you need to say goodbye to snow, or you need to say goodbye to certain products you won't be able to buy in the new country. So there's all different ways, but one of the things of learning to leave well is to saying goodbye to people, to places, and to things. The third way or to leave well is to look ahead realistically. The third way to leave well is to look ahead realistically. This is to set realistic expectations of yourself. So we need to look ahead and face the fact that there are many difficulties coming up. There are some things that we will probably experience. And if we acknowledge what might come, then we can ask and prepare ourselves for how are we going to deal with the problem when we get there? How are we going to deal with this when we get there? It's helpful to talk to someone about who's already gone through this and think through how you will handle certain situations. So another thing is to acknowledge and not ignore that difficulties will come, and not to ignore them when they come. And don't think something's wrong with you because you're wrestling with some of these emotions. We said some of the emotions in the leaving stage were this rejection and resentment and sadness and guilt that are going on. Also, do not locate where you are in the transition experience and realize that God will help you transition through to victory or re-involvement. So we want to be able to leave well and transition into re-involvement into a new place, into this new change, a new job, a new position, a new area. So we're going to leave well by resolving unfinished business, by saying goodbye to people, to places and things, and to looking ahead realistically. The next thing we're going to look at is, did we handle, how did handling the goodbyes go? So look at the handout that says transition, how did the goodbyes go? So what you're going to do in this activity is you're going to go through and look at how your goodbyes went. So how do I usually handle goodbyes? As I was preparing to leave, how did the goodbyes go? Did I feel it necessary to say goodbye to places? As I was detaching from important relationships, did anyone share that they had hurt feelings? In the process, did I find it necessary to resolve some problems with people? And have I left behind any unresolved conflict? So at this time, you're going to shut off the video and take time to answer this. As a group, you have the option of just sharing one thing from the list or going through them all. That will depend on how long it's going to take. Usually sharing one thing or generally summing up how your goodbyes goes is enough. And when you've done that, turn back on the video. Often people do not enter well because they did not leave well, and they've left too many loose ends. So in order to say hello well, we must first say goodbye well. So some of you may be saying, well, what do I do now? You filled out the how did the goodbyes go, and some things were brought up. Why am I bringing this up now? Because some of you will need to get on your email and email somebody. Somebody will need to set up a Skype appointment. What do you need to do? Do you need to say goodbye adequately? Do you need to express love and appreciation to somebody? Do you need to ask someone for forgiveness? Some of you need to let people know what was going on with you as you were in the situation of detaching from them. So maybe you didn't have the words before, you didn't understand what was going on. Now you can recognize what you were feeling in the leaving stage, and you go back and you say, I'm so sorry, I was feeling rejected because I wasn't being invited to anything, and I started to get resentful, I was very sad, and then I was feeling guilty for taking your grandkids out of the country, or I was feeling guilty for leaving you with this work situation or ministry situation, or I was feeling guilty for this. You can start to explain and then just say, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, I didn't realize that was what I was feeling. If you feel like crying, cry. I mean, let it come out. Now, some people express that they didn't really say goodbye to people that were like their supporters, are going to be supporting them and praying for them, and they were going to stay in constant communication. So as far as that type of goodbye, do you need to say the words goodbye? Probably not exactly, especially if you're going to keep in touch with them, because you're not stopping the relationship. You want people to be actively involved in your life and what you're doing. But what you can still, the way you can express goodbye is by just saying, I'm going to miss you. I'm going to miss you. You know, let's make sure we stay in touch, or respond to my emails or my newsletters and stay up with what's going on. You're not going to be able to go and close these unresolved conflicts or deal with goodbyes without God's help. So you're going to need Him to help you. Why do we bring this up now in this whole transition, change period, going through the middle of the phases of transition? Because in order to say hello well, You need to have done an adequate job in saying goodbye. This is going to be the key for you and your staff to make sure that they've had closure, they've dealt with sadness, that you allow them to cry when they want to cry, that they go back and resolve those unresolved conflicts. So the third phase in transition is the transition experience is called transition. The third phase in the transition experience is called transition. So what is your social status during this time? The problem is you don't have a status, a role, or position. So you belong back home and now you're starting all over again. So it's just you and your unknown. You were celebrated for who you were back home, and now no one knows who you are. So maybe you ran a business or a ministry, and now you face this whole place of nothingness. It reminds me of the movie The Never-Ending Story, and the whole time they're trying to get away from the nothingness, because the nothing is sweeping over the land, the nothing. And that's what I call it, the times of nothing, when you feel useless and bored. But what I try to say to people during that time is enjoy it. Use the time during the transition where nobody knows you and you're not pressed by all the ministry expectations quite yet. Use that time to prepare yourself. Give yourself time to adjust to the new area. Do all the prep work that you need to get done, because later you're not going to have the time to do it. And you're going to wish you had the time to do it later. And one example of how I felt statusless was, I think that I was doing fine when I moved to Honduras, when I was in the States, up until the point of where I had to hand over, or no longer have keys. What do you mean keys? Well, you sell the house, you give your keys. You sell the cars, you give your keys. And all of a sudden, this key ring that holds all of you, kind of like your status of what you have and what you do, and locks to doors to buildings and office and ministry and whatever, all these keys are turned in or they're gone. Even my P.O. box key I had to turn over to my in-laws because they would be checking. And so you have that brief moment of, I have nothing. The nothing is coming. You just have nothing. What is your social posture during this transition? So there's an attitude of disposition is of chaos, because everything's unsettled. So you just have this feeling of chaos. You're leaving your life structure. You're leaving it. Missionaries on furlough lack structure as far as roles and responsibilities as well. You're victimized by somebody else's schedule. Other people go off to work, and you don't have work to go off to. Meal times are changed. Bedtimes are changed, and you wonder, how do I fit in this? What is expected of me? I don't belong here. And so we're in this statusless place of things are unknown, and the feeling here, or the posture, is of chaos. I have to initiate relationships. I feel this isolation. I might feel self-centered, might exaggerate problems, or there's a sense of ambiguity or misunderstandings that can happen. So there's a lack of structure even in your relationships. When missionaries return, or even if you're working overseas and you return, you expect to pick up in those relationships where you left on. And what you get confronted with the first time you return home is that life has gone on without you. Things have happened and relationships have built and people have spent holidays together and people have spent events together, and you haven't been there. Their life has gone on and yours hasn't, and you weren't part of those new things. So we expect it to be a situation where things are held like they're just suspended in time, but it's not. People went on. They started doing other things, and sometimes you feel very left behind. Life went on and things changed. So what is happening with your psychological experience, your mental and emotional state? What happens is that once we leave, it's as though a death has taken place. People go through the whole grief process, which is similar to what happens when somebody dies. So when you're going through the grief, that includes these stages of denial, anger, guilt, sadness, and then finally a release of the person. So the process of grief is denial, anger, guilt, sadness, and finally you release the person. So they say life has to go on. But when life goes on, your space closes. And when you go back and discover that the hole that we left was closed up, when we return, we don't fit in anymore. This can be very painful. And we say, I really don't belong here. We float around. And there's a part of lack of structure or lack of structure in the family or the friendship setting. So, what type of lack of structure are we experiencing? Of time, of our own expectations, of family settings that cause anxiety now. So problems begin to be exaggerated. It's common for people who are in transition to get preoccupied with their health. And what that means, it's like if you sneeze and you think you have pneumonia, if you have a headache, maybe it's a brain tumor. If you're in another country, it could be, oh no, I picked up something from the water and it's really just the flu, but you think it's like malaria or dengue or something, and you over-exaggerate some of these problems or health problems. Another problem that can happen is sometimes dreams, people get dreams and nightmares. And so these nightmares can even be to the extent of they're like losing an arm or a leg, losing a family member, or dying themselves in the dream. It doesn't happen to everybody, but some people in transition, depending on the level of chaos and how they're feeling about not fitting in somewhere, they can start to have these nightmares. Another thing that happens is grief and loss. So during the leaving process, the grieving is somewhat iced over. So, but you're in the actual transition stage, you can often no longer deny it by this time. You can become emotionally flaky or emotionally unstable. People say, I've never had that problem before. So all of a sudden they're in a situation where they're having a problem with something, but it's not something that they've ever had a problem with before. The strangest things can bring on tears. All of a sudden you're crying over the dishes or not having water in the house and you don't know why that's happening. But you are okay. You are okay. You are not losing your mind and you are not having a nervous breakdown. You are not losing your mind and you are not having a nervous breakdown. This is the transition phase. This is the chaos, the feelings of chaos and the feelings of anxiety that are coming. So as an example, there was a missionary that came out of Cuba, but she had when they were in Cuba, they had a 6-week-old baby, a 6-year-old, and an 8-year-old. And when her husband and the other missionaries and 7 Cuban pastors were thrown into prison all on the same night. So her husband was in prison for 4 years. During that 4 years that her husband was in prison, the wife never cried once. Never cried. So she was probably trying to hold it together for her kids and to continue living. But when a missionary came into contact with her later in life, when the husband was relieved and they were back in the States and they were all together, she would cry about everything. The littlest thing would happen and she would cry. Like she would hear a song and she would cry. She would watch a TV show, she would cry. And what was happening was all that time that she was holding it together and didn't cry because her husband was in prison for 4 years, and all of that chaos and transition that caused, when she went through the transition of going back to the States, she would just cry over every little thing. So on a psychological, emotional level, what is happening is anxiety. And in this anxiety, there's a loss of self-esteem, loss of continuity, and there's also some grief and emotional instability. So during the leaving stage, you have anticipation, but during the transition phase, you have disappointment. So you have, in the involvement stage, you're present oriented. In the leaving stage, you're future or temporary oriented. And then in the transition stage, you're starting to think about the future. But there can also be some depression in that stage. So it's very common to do an emotional freeze over during this phase. Family members might take it very personally. when you're doing a freeze over. And I just want to add this note that it's possible for you to be in one part of the transition and another person in your family to be in a different part of the transition. And so you're able to deal or cope with things in a different way because you've already learned to deal with them, or you're in a different place and your emotions are in a different place and your status is at a different place, your posture and your psychological experience. The fourth phase of the transition experience is entering. So what is your social status during this time? What happens is we begin introducing new into our lives, but we still feel like an outsider. We don't have anybody. Nobody knows us. We're unknown. People don't trust you yet. They don't know what you can do, and they go right past you to get help or information that you could do. You wonder if people will ever begin to appreciate you, and you wish you could just have this name tag that said, I'm so-and-so, I come from here, this is what I can offer you, this is what I can do, this is who I am, this is how I can help you, this is what I've done before. But people in this stage describe being treated like they just came out from under a rock, or as if they were born the day they climbed off the airplane. So you may be skilled in all sorts of things, but people don't know you yet. You're still unknown in this place. So they can misinterpret different things or not ask you to help in certain ways, and they're not doing it on purpose, they just don't know you yet. Another thing is you can misinterpret behavior signals. So thinking that somebody doesn't want to be friends or that somebody doesn't like you. And that the reason for this is mainly because people are already in their groups. As an example, for teachers who go to teach in an international school, there may be teachers there that have been there for a year, 2 years, or many years. They've already made their friends. They already know who their friends are and where they fit in. They've already gone through all of this. So they've had these friends for a lot of times. And what happens is you're coming in as a new person. And it has nothing to do with whether they like you or whether they want to be friends or anything, or that they're trying to reject you. But it's because you're the outsider, you have to make the extra effort to press into that group. I remember in college an example of not pressing in very well. I had gotten married the last year of my senior year of college, and we lived in married housing. So I thought as a fun thing to do for women on campus, for the single ladies as well as the married ladies, was to have an afternoon tea in my house. And I would cook these fancy, desserts, and I would have teas ready and coffee ready. And I would sit there. I've cleaned the house, I've done everything, and nobody would come. Nobody would come. And I'm thinking, man, if somebody did this and I was in college, I would go to a tea party. Because being in married housing was a little bit more isolated than living in the dorm life. So I thought, man, everybody would want to do this. But I didn't press in because I felt really rejected. So I think I tried it maybe a couple times, and when nobody came, I just gave up. On the other hand, I have an example of when I did have to press in. When I first came to Honduras and I was in my first Bible study with other missionaries in Zambrano, I didn't have to press in. There were only like 3 or 4 of us missionaries, so we all needed each other. And it was no problem to get involved and be part of this Bible study. But then I went through another transition and moved to another area, and I was closer to the city. Well, when you're closer to the city, there was now an English-speaking church service and Bible studies, and they were full of women, 10 women or whatever. It was very easy to feel rejected and like the outsider because everybody already had their friends. In fact, a lot of them that went to this Bible study were driving to the Bible study together, would do all their city errands together, would meet up for lunch together, and it was very easy to feel like the outsider. But instead of just saying, fine, they already have their friends, they don't need any more friends, forget it, I kept pressing in. I kept going to the Bible study, and instead of waiting to be invited to things, I started inviting people over myself. So in order to have friends, you have to be a friend. And you're going to have to press into those groups. They're not trying to do it on purpose. And a lot of times in the nature of foreign jobs and foreign missionary work, people are transient. They move a lot. So it's hard to know, who am I going to become friends with? Are you going to be here for more than 1 year? Do I want to put that much time and effort into the relationship? And so they're going to be standoffish unless you push in and you press in to make those relationships. So despite those feelings that you're having, know that they are just feelings that are part of the entering phase. Feelings that are normal for the entering phase, and that you're going to have to press past those feelings to make an effort in your relationship. During the entering phase, what is your social posture? So sacred objects or items to have in your house all of a sudden become very important. Because there's ambiguity in our situation of I'm not sure what's expected of me, I'm not sure where all the pieces in my life fit, we need to look towards our familiar objects around the house. I don't know if you remember Laura Ingalls from Little House on the Prairie, but she had this little China doll, and everywhere she went, the China doll went. So maybe when you move it in your house, you need certain pictures that go up. Maybe children have stuff such as a pillow or a stuffed animal that follow them around, and there's nothing else just like it. These items and objects in your house help to bridge the gap, and they're very important in this entering phase. What is your psychological experience or your mental and emotional state during this time? What happens during the entering phase is you can be very vulnerable and easily offended. So sometimes when we've had an addiction in the past, we are likely to relapse. So this could be overeating, over socializing, bulimia, smoking, overspending, alcoholic addictions, biting or picking fingernails or skin. In fact, one missionary, in an effort to understand or deal with what was going on in the entering phase and compensate for some of her emotions, became obsessive compulsive about her laundry line. Now, it didn't matter to anybody else how to hang up the laundry, but she had just created her own system, a behavior of, I can control my laundry, so I'm going to hang it this way, and she would only hang it this way, and if other people tried to hang it another way, they couldn't hang it that way. Had to be done that way. In fact, so that was her way of having to deal with this entering phase and way of kind of trying to deal with some of the chaos. Another missionary's daughter would rearrange her room every so often. So in her room was the only place that she felt some type of control. And so she would, by moving around the room, she was in control of what her room looked like and how it was. Sometimes we regress during the stage in our maturity. For children, it's easy to see maybe they were potty trained before and now they start to have accidents. Maybe they were sucking their thumb before and now they're wanting a pacifier, or they go back to these things. But as an adult, sometimes going back in maturity, you think, man, I should be old enough to deal with this, but we're actually going through some of this uncertainty and things that are happening during the transition phase. Another thing that should happen during this time is mentor seeking, or maybe we're trying to do. Often our worst possible mentors will seek out the new person. Misfits, marginal people, people in troubles with peers and authority figures, or those pushing drugs or alcohol, will tend to search for the lonely new person. So you are going to need a mentor, but choose your mentor carefully. So a conscious mentor system, like a care group or a church in your area, would be a good option. This is important for teenagers or to understand. People that move around a lot and get tired of learning a lot. What happens is those misfits find your kids. If you transition and they move into they're a teenager and they move into high school, and the kids that are the misfits or on drugs will find your kids first, because the other kids have a history of having their friendships and being together. So it's really important to guide them and help them to press in to relationships that are already there and get into the right crowd. On the other hand, when you go into an area where maybe you're homeschooling and there aren't a lot of kids, or isn't that opportunity, sometimes the parent becomes the friend of the teenager. So you become your son or your daughter's best friend. It's not really so bad. It's common with third culture kids, but watch out for problem kids finding them when they enter another situation, because they've so long been used to having you as a friend, and then those other kids find them. Another thing that happens is parents are going through the chaos of the transition. Sometimes we become so self-centered that we're not there for our children. So children need to be able to butt heads with an adult. So even if you're their friend, you're still the parent. You're still the adult. Because what we are really questioning is, who can we trust? Who can we trust? And the ambivalence is like this: I'm glad I'm here, but I wish I was not. I wish I could go home at least for the weekend. So sometimes the slightest things will make you cry, and you'll be like, I just want to fly back home, do the laundry, and come back. Like, I don't even want to be gone long. I just want to go back to the home country, do something simple that I'm not able to do so simply here, and then I'll come back. So it's just very ambivalent right then. And we might panic, thinking that we're never going to fit in. During this stage, you might get to you have this vulnerability. You might become fearful, things are ambivalent, get easily offended. This could lead to depression, psychosomatic problems, and the future is very temporary at this point, very temporary. But there is hope. There is hope, even though we've been talking about this whole leaving process and the transition and the entering and all these things that are happening to our social status and happening to our posture and our emotions. There is hope. So don't stop or run away when you are experiencing these transition phases. Press on to the last phase, which is re-involvement. So the last phase is the re-involvement phase. What is your social status going to be? Eventually, you're going to sense a belonging again. You're going to have a sense of belonging. You're going to feel like you fit in, not always with the culture or the people, but in a knowing of who you are and what you are doing. So a renewed sense of position and purpose comes back. So you're known, a knowing, you know what your position is, you know what you're doing, you're beginning to belong again. How long is that going to take? For most people, it can take 3 to 6 weeks. But different missionaries have had people that they didn't feel accepted up till 2 years. So everybody does eventually come full circle where they feel secure, affirmed, and where they belong and have their place. But the timing really depends on the individual person and how willing they are to work through each of the phases. What is this social posture at this time? See, our manner and our disposition is that of belonging. We start to get involved again and have a genuine concern of others. So belonging, we're involved, confront our behavior, and we have this concern for others. What is a psychological experience or emotional and mental status? You are going to be in a place of intimacy again, where you feel secure and affirmed. Secure and affirmed. So you've gone through involvement all the way to re-involvement, from a present orientated all the way to a future permanent, where you're feeling becoming to that sense of belonging and getting re-involved in your next place, your transition, your change. Sometimes you'll have feelings that are located on the transition experience, and sometimes you'll have feelings that are not of your own. What do I mean by that? Well, if you go into a country that has a very big sense of lack of hope, you might start to feel that. That is not your own feeling, but the feeling that is around you through other people or circumstances or the whole atmosphere of the country. It's always important in both situations, whether it's a feeling you're feeling from the transition chart or whether it's this external feeling, is to pray it through. So if it's from transition, you need to humble yourself to God. Admit what you're feeling and ask God for help. Say, man, I feel like everything's chaotic. I'm tending to take things personally. I'm being very self-centered. Help me not to do this. I'm feeling a loss of self-esteem, or I'm moving into just superficial living. I'm entering in, but I'm just watching everybody. I'm uncertain of who to trust. And be able to express that and pray that through. And the second, if it's a lack of hope in a country or something else that's going on, that's a type of intercession that you pray for the country or the person or the business or the ministry until you feel a release. What can you do during the transition phase? How can you get better? What can you do? One is to get support for yourself, whether this is a church, a Bible study, a small group, or a prayer partner. But is to get some support or help. 2, change as little as possible. What does that mean? Well, for your kids, have them bring something that's familiar for them. I was told to have them bring a set of sheets and their own pillow. And then there's, other stuffed animals and things that they brought. But take your sacred objects out, the objects that you're familiar with. Maybe you hang up a certain name plate on your door everywhere you live. Maybe you put up the family pictures everywhere you live. Try to change as little as possible. Put things in the same place in the kitchen. I remember a missionary was saying that every time they moved in a different place, the parent would put the silverware in the same place in the kitchen, and different things. So every time they went into a new kitchen, actually it was a military family, her mom would put everything in the same place in the kitchen. Why? To have as little change as possible. That way the kids, even though the kitchen was new, they would go to the same place to find what they needed. 3, contact people you miss. I mean, it used to be missionaries and people going to another country and volunteer work, you were isolated in the middle of nowhere. We didn't have all the technology available to us now. Now you can email people, you can call people, you can Skype with people for free or very inexpensive. So take advantage of that. You miss somebody, contact them. And let your kids contact people too. Another thing is, give yourself and your children as much of a sense of control as possible. Give yourself and your children as much of a sense of control as possible. This will help fight helplessness. So give them that sense of control and ownership in the new place. Another thing is, allow for expression of feeling. That includes the feelings that we typically say are bad. Now, the truth about feelings are not good or bad. Feelings are neutral. They're neither good nor bad. Feelings are just indicators or warning lights of something that needs to be dealt with. So we need to let our kids express their anger or their sadness. We need to be able to admit we're feeling guilty, because in that is indicating something, maybe a wrong way of thinking, a wrong belief system that then we can change. Okay, so the feeling only becomes sin when you act on it. The feeling is not bad in and of itself. Feelings are not good or bad, they're neutral. They're warning lights, they're indicators that something needs to be dealt with. A way of thinking, a belief system, so go and deal with that. And take care of physical needs. So have balanced meals, exercise, get adequate rest, because you're having all this additional stress. Like we started with the stress indicator chart, and we're going through this transition of change. And in order to make that go smoothly, we need to take care of our physical body so that doesn't affect our ability to cope with things in our emotions and in our thinking. So another thing you can do is remember your first mission trip or your first time to that country, or the reason that made you want to go there and work there or serve there. Take out old photos of old times, ministry, personal, and things in the country, or the first time there, or something exciting that happened at the job. Remember the call. So when God showed you who you are and what He wants you to do, go back and remember that. Take that out. Set that in front of you. Another thing you can do is forgive quickly. Forgive quickly. You know you're going to be easily offended, or that it might be coming from unresolved conflict, so just be able to forgive people quickly. Forgive yourself when you mess up and you don't let your kids talk about how they're feeling. Forgive yourself, forgive your spouse, forgive your kids. You might have to forgive the whole country. Forgive a ministry, a church, a pastor, missionaries, friends, co-worker, volunteer, staff member. Just get rid of it. Just get rid of it. And the other thing you can do is pray and give thanks. Pray and give thanks. So there's lots of information out there on transition, moving from where you once felt involved to the leaving, the transition, the entering, and the re-involvement. Create everything you need to do to help you through this transition. Recognize that nothing's wrong with you. Learn as much as you can if you've gone to another culture or even another state about what people are like, and hopefully that will help. Please feel free to send me any messages or emails on how this has helped you, or other things that you feel would help people in transition. And maybe in the future we can include them in the talk or share them or have a way online to be able to share them with one another. Thank you.